voice for hikers, and this is our 16th year of hosting what we call Hike the Hill, which is our Trails Advocacy Week that we do in partnership with the Partnership for the National Trails System and with other trail advocates like Realtors, Conservancy, and other organizations that are very passionate about trails and ensuring that we get the message out to congressional offices as well as the administration. Today, and we want to thank also, I want to thank Congressman Blumenauer's office for assisting us in arranging this. Some of you are aware, and those of you who are staffers, one of the things I want to underscore is that we work very closely with what is called the Congressional Trails Caucus. Some of your representatives may already be members. Earl Blumenauer is the chair of that, a congressman from Oregon, and there are about 50 congressional members of that Trails Caucus currently, which is bipartisan and goes to support trails in the broadest sense across the nation. And so I encourage any of you who are staffers to please consider asking your rep to join the Congressional Trails Caucus, and you can certainly contact myself or our Director of Government Relations, Sheila Franklin. Sorry, I'm thinking of someone else. As I said, we've been doing this for a number of years, and what we wanted to do is underscore the following. And we have two objectives, really, about trails. One is we want to inform you a bit about the economic importance and the benefits that come from trails. But we also want to inspire you to think about building trails and those surrounding natural areas, because trails, as you know, is a tread, whether it's you're hiking, biking, or even water trails if you're out paddling. But it's the surrounding area that why most of us, or I think probably all of us, are motivated to get out on a trail. And a couple things I just want to underscore. Trails are certainly nothing new to American society. In fact, I would say that trails are part of American DNA. If you think about the history of this country, trails in every way, shape, or form part of that. Whether it's exploration with the Lewis and Clark Trail, and then exploration, whether it's just movement from one place to another, of course, as well as, of course, from a recreation side. And even there are trails of anguish, trails like the Trails of Tears, and or for civil rights from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, etc. The point is, from our trail community perspective and from the larger American society, we feel that trails are essential to our well-being. They form part of our community. So we're going to take a two-pronged approach today in the briefing. We're going to have time for questions. We have some other resource material. There's some handouts there for you. We want to share sort of I'm going to share first with you sort of a 25,000-foot level of what the outdoor recreation and trails economy looks like in the United States today. And we were being a little stingy at first because we weren't sure how many staffers were going to come. So each congressional staffer should have received one of these. I should point out that American Hiking Society is also a member of a trade organization. We're a nonprofit member of the Outdoor Industry Association, and I'm going to be referencing some really new information about the economics of outdoor recreation in the United States. And I think I hope you'll be very fascinated, and I hope there'll be some numbers in here that we talk about that'll resonate well. And then we're going to shift, and our colleague Pat Tomes from Rails to Trails Conservancy, which is a really important and terrific partner of ours, is going to talk and bring us down to the trail level. And Pat and her colleagues at Rails to Trails have done a terrific job of looking at some of the economic drivers and the actual numbers. You're going to see some hard numbers about specific trails and what kind of economic generator or engine they are in terms of some areas. So with that, and you should have bios of both of us. You should have a lot of different handouts, and I know we're going to be referring to those for you today. I'm just going to frame a couple things for you first. When we look at the economic benefits, now we're going to be talking about actually generating economic benefit through trails. But again, think about the broader picture of trails. Don't just think about the trail tread that you're walking on. Think about why people go out and walk, hike, bike, paddle, you name it, get out on horseback and get out on trails. It's to get out into that surrounding area. And we believe that, and I hope many of you, I'm sure many of you are outdoor folks, trails really are one of the best ways for you to connect with nature on your own terms, whether it is hiking, biking, paddling, you name it. And so I want to just frame 4 key areas where we see are some very large economic drivers for economic generation of benefits from trail. I'm not going to go on these in detail because I'm going to show you some details right after that. First is there are significant 6.1 million jobs, frankly, and I'm going to show you that data in a second, around trails. And you see, as we all know, there's significant positive benefits, economic benefits related to having good quality trails and neighborhood parks, etc., related to community improvement. And of course, we've seen a real boom in greening urban redevelopment. Those have tangible economic underpinnings to them. Second big area is, and I think many of you, hopefully most of you are aware, that tourism is a huge economic driver in the economy of the United States, as well as many, or most countries in the world, frankly. And trail tourism is a significant driver. And it's become particularly important since in this recession, so many Americans have had to cut back on more exotic or expensive travel. They have found that getting out on trail-based vacations, whether it's in our iconic parks, national monuments, national forests, etc., become very affordable, and those trails provide us the avenue to get out into nature, get out into quality places, or to get out on a significant cultural experience as well. So we see trail tourism is really helping drive us, so just keep that in mind as we look at the numbers. And then a third area, and I'm sure some of you who are homeowners probably thought about the value of having parks and trails nearby. And what I think is pretty extraordinary is today the National Association of Homeowners still, and this is a quote from them, that trails consistently remain the #1 community amenity sought by prospective homeowners. And those of you who know how the economy of this country is driven, you see home ownership, building, or refinancing, you name it, is all driven around whether people are buying or selling homes. And people are buying and selling homes, being selective, wanting to be near trails. And I think it's pretty astounding that that industry is recognizing trails as the #1 community amenity. And then finally, as we know, we won't go into a lot of the healthcare elements, but there are some extraordinary benefits, as we know, of having trails. And guess what? That's one of the reasons people like to have trails near their homes, so they can get out, trail run, ride their bike, hike, go out, take a family walk, you name it. And you can just see a couple of examples there, which we won't go into in detail. You know, Lincoln, Nebraska has found almost a 3-to-1 benefit of making an investment in trails and seeing the health return there. It's about 2.94 there. And we can help you with these studies if you want to see the details. Second is Miami, a very different environment than Lincoln. They see on just a local Ludlam trail there in the Miami community, you see about $2 million in direct medical cost savings as a result of that one trail. And that's pretty extraordinary. So let's just look at the whole spectrum of trails, because when we talk about it, I don't want to talk about just, we're not going to be just looking at iconic trails going up the backside of El Capitan and Assembly or Tetons, etc. We're talking about the majority of the hundreds of thousands of miles of trails in America that are nearby. So think about both the iconic, or more backcountry trails, if you will, which are this. You can just look and see, kind of picture these and think about, because we're going to be talking about the economics across the board, and then Pat's going to have some examples that are going to be probably a little more focused on looking at community open spaces, rails and trails, etc. So you're going to see a good mix. But be thinking about that, because trails are everywhere. There is nowhere you can escape, actually, trails. And we've created them for a good reason, and there's a reason why. Now I want to share with you some new information that came out in August 2012. Outdoor Industry Association, which is the national trade industry for all the outdoor manufacturers, all the cool gear that you like to buy, and of course all the big retailers and what have you. But the outdoor industry, the outdoor recreation economy, and by the way, everything I'm going to show you, all the details are in this publication. And you can get this online at outdoorindustry.org. But I wanted to just give you an idea. There's over 6 million American jobs that are generated each and sustained as a result of outdoor recreation. $646 billion in spending. And then you can see almost 40 million in federal tax, pardon me, 40 billion. Because I'm going to be using that billion a few times here, and almost 40 billion in state and local revenue. Okay. Big numbers. Kind of let that sink in for a second. Keeping that in mind because I want to show you where outdoor recreation overall, and I want to underscore this is human-powered and motorized outdoor recreation collectively. I'll show you an aggregation or disaggregation of those in a minute. But look at the number of jobs that are generated through outdoor recreation. Of course, a lot of that is tourism as well. Nature-based tourism, ecotourism, etc. There's over 6 million jobs generated each year from outdoor recreation. And look at some of the other industries that you see in there that you would probably associate as bigger job generators. And yet outdoor recreation, which trails is such a fundamental element to a quality outdoor recreation experience, is driving a greater number of jobs for Americans than any of those other industries. Pretty cool. Another look at the investment that you see. Outdoor recreation overall has greater spending, $646 billion in pharmaceuticals, than gasoline and other fuels. Well, it's a pretty surprising number, and it's because of the full range of expenditures that users, people who want to get outdoors on trails, get out in their boats, etc., want to expend. So this is a huge industry in this country. Now here's some specific. I hesitate, I learned a long time ago, never put up a data slide like this, but at the same time, you do have this data available. And I've highlighted in this, pulled out the numbers from our recent study from the Outdoor Industry Association. And you can certainly find your own favorite sport in there, outdoor recreation activity. But what I want to do is just underscore a couple of things. You look at the first column, you see the $646 billion in what outdoor recreation users, enthusiasts like us, spend each year in this country. And you look at trail sports, almost $81 billion. That is hiking, backpacking, and rock climbing and trail running in that category, just to give you an idea of what's spent there. Camping, of course, is huge. That includes all ranges, including RV. So there's a lot of expenditures there. And then bicycling is, as you would expect, quite significant. And then you look over at the jobs. Trail generates almost 800,000 American jobs each year. Camping, of course, has a big increase. And then you continue to go across and you look at those numbers. These are huge economic benefits related to having trails nearby, trails as destinations, etc. Let me look at this a little bit differently now. And again, it's tough because there's a lot of numbers, but of the $646 billion that was spent each year on outdoor recreation, now what this is, the study indicates what we'll call the ripple effect. And beyond that $646 billion that's spent on outdoor recreation, how much additional spending goes on beyond acquisition of gear, purchasing hotels, spending at a park, buying food. And then you can see that that has a ripple effect of over $1.6 trillion each year. And if you look at those numbers and see trail sports alone, nearly $200 billion of a ripple effect, beyond that already $80 billion plus that I just talked about. I want to just underscore how significant these numbers are in the American economy. Outdoor recreation, specifically getting out on trails and onto our public lands, whether it's local parks, our backcountry areas like BLM national monuments, national forests, our iconic national parks, is a significant economic driver. And that the gateway communities that we find around any of our parks, which of course most people get access to those parks or to those natural resource or cultural resources by how? If they're not in their car driving through, they're either out on a trail, a land-based trail, walking, hiking, backpacking, riding a bicycle, or they're even paddling on water trails. This includes, by the way, water trail. You see paddling in there. I want to make sure we underscore that. So this is quite a significant element to us. And so what we want to do is just keep this in mind. And where's Pat? Okay, because we're going to shift over. And what I want to do is keep thinking about these significant numbers. $646 billion invested each year in outdoor recreation, 80 billion of that specifically on trails, another 190 billion or so of ripple effect from trails. And be thinking about the importance of quality trail and surrounding area experiences for Americans. Americans of all walks of life, because especially as we see the continued browning of America, the continued and rich diversity that we see continuing to develop in the country, these are very important, critical experiences for us, not only from a physical, mental, or even spiritual level, as you will, in terms of getting out on trails, getting out into nature, but also these are key sustainable economic benefits and drivers for economic development, both at the community level, state, and national level. The last thing I want to mention, and then I'm going to shift over and Pat's going to share some specifics, is I want you to put February 14th in your mind, not only because it's Valentine's Day, which I have to keep in mind myself, but also the Outdoor Industry Association will be rolling out state-specific data. This is aggregated by national level. The Outdoor Industry Association, of which American Hiking we are a member, will be rolling out state-specific outdoor recreation data. And then with the next phase is we're going to be looking to disaggregate, if you will, the specifics around each of those activities. This is a significant study that's been conducted over more than a year. Going to be very interesting to, I think, every congressional district. Every congressional district has trails. Trails are reaching every element of society. And so this information at the state level, I think when it comes out in a few days, be looking for it. And again, just go to outdoorindustry.org, or you can contact one of us and stuff. With that, wanted to take a look and see what some really exciting stuff that's going on the ground. So I want to introduce to you again Pat Tomes from Rails to Trails Conservancy. So Pat.
Thank you, Greg. Is this good? So you hear me okay?
A little closer.
A little closer?
Yeah, I got a booming voice.
Yeah, you do. And I don't. All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. As Greg said, I'm with Rails to Trails Conservancy. I'm the program manager in their Northeast Regional Office, which covers a 10-state area from Pennsylvania and Delaware north through all of the New England states. So I'm just curious, how many people do we have here from the Northeast part of the country? Anyone from Pennsylvania? No? Ohio? I know that's not Northeast, but I'll throw it out there. Maryland? All of you live in Maryland, yeah? Okay. Well, most of my stats are based on Pennsylvania, because even though we are a 10-state area, my focus has been Pennsylvania, primarily because we have so many projects going on in that state. The rail trails, just for a brief overview, are trails built on railroad corridors. That means not abandoned corridors necessarily as ones that are no longer active. And we have found ways to build trails on those corridors around the country. There's a lot of connections to be made with canal towpaths, residential development communities, as well as retail areas. They're all connecting and using the rail trail as a backbone, as it were, for the system. So these are dedicated non-motorized pathways for the most part. Bicycling and pedestrian use are the largest activities, primary activities. They not only represent a non-motorized highway of transportation for pedestrians and bicyclists, they also offer excellent economic opportunities, as Greg was pointing out, simply because, in terms of rail trails, there are inherent characteristics that place the railroad near business centers of the communities that they run through. As I said, Pennsylvania has been the leading state in rail trail development. Now count 150 open trails in the state. That's more than any other in the country. Communities around the nation are realizing the economic potential of trails as highly desirable destinations that bring dollars into places they serve. And as I speak, Marianne has graciously agreed to flick through a slideshow that we have. They're just various trails that we threw together for your viewing pleasure. So these highly desirable amenities, as Greg pointed out, the National Realtors Association has determined that it's the #1 amenity for many young people looking for, making those decisions. Where do I want to live? How livable is this community? And trails, places to walk and bicycle, are a huge part of that. In addition to preserving critical open space and providing important transportation options, trails and greenways attract visitors from near and far. Visitors who facilitate job growth and tourism-related opportunities like restaurants, local stores, and lodging. To achieve economic vitality itself, the trail must bring the user into easy, direct contact with retail establishments. And we see this a lot in Pennsylvania, where we've done these surveys quite a bit. If the trail is out in a very rural area, if there's no business near the trail, then the economic impact is obviously going to be limited to the hard goods that the user buys in order to use that trail. By hard goods, we mean the bicycle itself, the shoes, the clothing, that sort of thing. So these are all factors that we study when we're doing these surveys. The Trail Towns program is a program that was developed by the Progress Fund in Pennsylvania. It's an economic development organization, and they are incubating this economic revitalization by focusing on the trail, specifically what's called the Great Allegheny Passage. Have any of you heard of that trail? Okay, all the back row. The Great Allegheny Passage is a superb trail. They've been working on it for probably 20 years in order to unite 150 miles of trail from a town called Cumberland, Maryland to Pittsburgh. In Cumberland, Maryland, that trail connects to the Scenic Canal towpath, which brings it the whole way into Georgetown. And most of you are familiar with where the canal towpath is there. Did you know that you could get on that trail and get to Pittsburgh? It's fantastic. And for the users that are out there, many users, the longer the distance traveled, the more likely they are to spend gads of money. Obviously, it's the overnight capacities, but of course the accessories that they have to use in order to go on these trails. So the Progress Fund, as I mentioned, started this initiative called the Trail Towns, and I think I'm just amazed by it, and I'm very happy with their results. Although they focused on this one trail, what they're doing is they're making small business loans to entrepreneurs that are interested in having a trailside business that adds to the community, that adds to the user's experience on the trail, and of course the business associate itself. And in a study that they did, not the Progress Fund, but the Great Allegheny, it's the Allegheny Trails Association, which is a coalition of trail managers that work on and coordinate activities on the Great Allegheny Passage. Their survey, the outcome of their survey showed that there were 700,000 annual trips taken on this corridor between Cumberland, Maryland, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In the 2008 survey, it showed a projected economic impact of $40 million per year. This amount includes $7.5 million paid in wages by trail-related businesses. Now just realize that this is one trail that we're talking about. Since 2007, they've determined that 54 new or expanded businesses serving trail users have created 83 new jobs in 8 small towns. Now, you don't see much of this on the Scenic Canal towpath because, for various reasons, the towpath follows the river to not necessarily go through retail centers. There are some small towns along the way that the businesses that are there certainly appreciate the revenue that they receive from trail users. But when you get out onto the rail trail portion of the trail, you'll see many of these towns. I mean, to create 54 jobs on one trail is pretty fantastic, even if it's 150 miles long. It's saying a lot, I think. And these stats are certainly very high. They're at the high end of the spectrum. It would be lovely to see these kinds of figures on all trails, but of course, you don't have that compactness that you do on the Great Allegheny Passage, where it has been developed, it has an overseer, it has a management entity that has encouraged this business development across the trail. Rails to Trails Conservancy ourselves, we have been documenting the economic impact of individual trails in the Northeast over the past 6 years. And we have now completed user surveys and analysis on 12 trails in the Northeast with funding from the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. We have been able to focus our trail user surveys in Pennsylvania. And we just completed, actually this week, we just sent to draft our 7th trail user survey. And I've been asked to tell you a little bit about our methodology that's used in completing these surveys. It's really relatively simple. We start with doing a count. You can't do a survey, an economic impact survey, without having a count of the actual users that are on the trail. So we use infrared counters, and we place those at different places along the trail, usually within a 10 to 20 mile distance. And from that we extrapolate and end up with an estimate of the number of users. At the same time, we develop a survey form that looks very much like this. Now this one has probably more questions than the normal user likes to answer, but part of the key to this paper survey is that it's called a self-selecting survey. We put these out at the primary access points along the trail. And we can distribute anywhere from 1,000. Usually we start out with 1,000. In our last survey, the D&L Trail Survey, we actually distributed as many as 4,000. We have a very good response rate, anywhere from 30% is a low. It usually averages around 40% return. So on these surveys, we're asking the important questions about the users, how much money they spend, what their primary activity is, where they access the trail. But each of these surveys, this being the 7th one, we have asked a number, it's about 8 questions that are exactly the same on every survey that we ask. It's probably more than that, actually. It's more like 10 questions that are exactly the same. So we've been collecting this data since 2008. And if you look in your handouts, you have a chart like this. And I'm sorry we didn't have a chance to update it. There were actually 2 more trails. This is something I put together for Pennsylvania, and so it just has Pennsylvania trails listed on it. But every one of those shows a positive economic impact. And if you look down, I think for me the important parts are in the middle of the sheet. You'll see the average dollar amount spent on soft goods by the trail user. On this particular scale, we have the low of $8.35 per person, going up to the high of I think on the oil heritage they included gas. So the importance, actually putting this together was a big help, and I realized how important it is to ask your questions exactly the same every time on the survey, which I'm sure the statisticians do very well. But we've had great success now in doing these surveys, and I got lost in my methods. Where was I? Oh, so we put the counters out and do the count, and then at the same time we're collecting this data. Then we tally all of the information together and we come up with our responses. We create a report that I don't have enough to pass out. I'd be happy to lay them here, let you look at them later. and I guess whoever walks away with one walks away with one. But the reports are basically, you know, they run through a little bit of detail in terms of where the trail is located, which is very important, the environment that it's in. We also have open comments that are tallied, and these are important to the trail management. We also ask questions about the maintenance and cleanliness and safety, the perceptions of that on the trail. But the most important figure that everyone looks for on these is the bottom line economic impact of that individual trail. And so in the survey that we just recently completed was on the D&L trail, which is it's the backbone of the Delaware and Lehigh National Heritage Corridor. This corridor is a 6-county area in eastern Pennsylvania, fairly large. It was designated a National Heritage Area in 1988. So they've been at it for quite a while in developing the system. The trail itself follows historic canal towpaths along the Lehigh and the Delaware rivers. It starts as far up as the Scranton area and then winds its way down to Philadelphia. It ends in Bristol, Pennsylvania, which is just not even 30 minutes east of Philadelphia City. So another of the handouts that's in your packet is this one. It's a chart, and it's really, so I put it together for the trail management, who was actually down here last week, the managers of the heritage area, to talk to their legislators. And you'll see on this sheet that the bottom line is that it shows more than 19 million in positive economic impact coming into the area from trail users. And in this situation, I want to clarify that these surveys are done of users just on the trail. We don't go 5 miles off from the trail and interview other recreational users or commuters. It's always people on the trail. And so it varies a lot in terms of the economic impact that you'll see on the trail. $19 million doesn't sound like a lot, but for a 150-mile dirt path, I think it's pretty neat. And the heritage area itself has a huge number of historic sites that they cover. But this trail is the ribbon that goes through the whole area in terms of, anywhere that you are in the heritage area, the trail's only going to be 15 or 20 minutes away from you if you're not right on it. So that is important. People know that no matter where they are in this corridor, which is a fairly broad area if you consider most of the eastern border of Pennsylvania, they know that they can access this trail. So that's very important. We've broken down the numbers on here based on the regions that the management works with. So these figures correlate to the areas in terms of how they're marketed. And that's very important too. If you looked at it in detail, you could recognize the places that are tourist destinations in themselves. In this case, the area of Whitehaven to Jim Thorpe. Jim Thorpe is a very popular tourist destination for an overnight visit. And they have several businesses there that cater to the trail users, not only bicycle rentals, but they also do shuttles. It's amazing how popular it is. And for those of you that may not know, Jim Thorpe is also the home to the country's largest water outfitter for rafting. They take thousands of rafts on the Lehigh River every year. Something you want to look into for a nice weekend getaway. So that is pretty much what I have in terms of our detail. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Have you had questions? Yes?
Sure. So obviously there are a variety of authorities that control where the trails are and how they're managed, whether they be cities, states, federal government, or even companies that provide services for goods going through them. Are there any in particular that you think have a great contribution to trails, or have been underfunded, or are completely ineffective?
Most of the trails are developed by a local citizens group that maybe gets the idea and then they go to their municipality for support. These surveys are tools for them to take to their municipal leaders and say, look, this is the impact that these trails have. It's not just for dog walkers. And so it's hard to answer your question specifically because there are a lot of variables in how the trails get. But yes, the funding is always needed. Just like the D&L Trail, which they started working on that in 1988. They're about 80% complete. So it's unusual for a trail to be built in less than 15 years. It's not unlike a road project. The more information that we provide in terms of the benefits of trails, I think the more help that the trail developers receive.
Gary?
I have a question that really could be for either of you, and it has to do with the types of economic benefit studies that have been done. It seemed to me that what we've seen today is mostly multiple use trails, and I'm wondering if there are benefit studies that have been done on single-use walking trails that we might use as a reference, and also in a related fashion, if there are studies that you're aware of that talk about the economic benefits to landowners who host trails on their properties. Something like that also would be really helpful.
One of the great challenges is when you start looking at single track trail or you start getting into more backcountry, and I want to underscore the fact that there are several people in the audience who may be able to contribute to an answer to that question. So I'd be thinking about it. I'm looking at several faces folks who manage long distance trail across this country. It's very difficult to get the kind of information that you're talking about. There are from land trusts that have collected that information. I don't have anything specific that I can quote out of my head in terms of particular states. I have some I can think of.
I'm going to call on our staff person in the audience, Tracy Hayden-Lowe, who might be able to answer that question.
Yeah, and then
you don't need a mic.
Hi, I'm the Director of Research at the Realtors Trails Conservancy, and I have a large library of economic impact assessments of trail facilities of all types throughout the United States, and I'm happy to share, so please get in touch. Offhand, I can tell you that we do have access to a number of peer-reviewed studies of specifically mountain biking trails. That's a great example of a type of trail it's not really going to be that multi-use, right? So it's pretty much just going to be mountain bikers that are getting out on these facilities, and a lot of those are out west, of course. We also have a number of studies that use hedonic modeling, which is a type of regression model that uses as its input actual real estate transactions that have happened to measure the property value impact of the presence of trails of various types. These hedonic models have been applied to parks, to rail trails, to unpaved trails. I have a suite of these. If you're interested in knowing what the impact of trails on property is, that's an active area of research that a lot of environmental economists are interested in quantifying, and there's good data on real estate transactions because of the multiple listing service. So there's some pretty robust studies that have narrowed down what the impact of trails on property values is, and generally it's positive. A few studies have found mixed effects, but mostly it's positive and yeah.
Laura? Yeah, Laura, if you wouldn't mind, this is a free form. I want to introduce you to Laura Belleville, who is the Director of Conservation Operations at the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, the longest single foot trail, I guess, and a member of the American Hiking Society Board. So,
Great. So we had the Forest Service did a visitor use study on the AT about 5 years ago, and what they actually had to do was they were doing some extrapolation around exit and entry points on the AT, and then extrapolated data in terms of visitor use. But as part of that study, they also looked at economic impact. And I don't know that that has been published yet, but I'll send you a link to or contact name. Dr. Browker with U.S. Forest Service has done that work. And at this point, we actually are looking at that as our baseline for economic figures for the AT, because we've launched a program called the Appalachian Trail Community Program that is trying to help communities become more aware of the Appalachian Trail as a brand that they could leverage, and then partnering locally with other community development sorts of organizations to help inspire or support small businesses that are trail related or outdoor recreation related. Because in many cases, especially in these long distance trails where you traverse many different types of communities, although predominantly rural communities, it's not just the trail that may draw people to a particular area. It could be you can hike on the AT for 2 days and go to the most scenic areas. You can hop on a national scenic river on another day. You can go mountain biking in yet another section of, say, national forest lands. And so thinking about those opportunities to collaborate beyond, just say the Appalachian Trail, I think we've certainly recognized that. But being able to also provide data to folks that are asking that specific question, well, what's the economic impact of the Appalachian Trail in my backyard? Here's the numbers. But probably more than anything with your national scenic trails that have global awareness, it's that. It's, you have some of these trails that are just icons, and leveraging that for both international travel and national travel has huge potential, I think. So, yeah, thanks.
Gary, did you want to bring some other information on?
Well,
We'd be happy. Come on down.
Yes.
I'll introduce you to Gary Werner, who's the Executive Director of the Partnership for the National Trail System, which is a collective of both all the congressionally designated national scenic and historic trails. Gary, use the microphone though, if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you, Greg. I actually wanted to harken back to the earlier question, I think, which was getting at how are these trails funded? And I want to bring it back here to point out, what you can do in terms of your work here in Washington with the congressional actions. And I'm going to look to Mary Ann Fowler from Rails to Trails for some help with this. But the ones that I'm familiar with, as Greg introduced me, the 30 national scenic and historic trails are primarily funded through the appropriations for the National Park Service, the Bureau of Land Management, and U.S. Forest Service, and the Fish and Wildlife Service. They have funding either in some cases line item budgets for some of these, or programmatic budgets for trails that benefit not only these iconic trails, but all of the other trails on the federal lands. So one way to support more aggressive or appropriate trail development and maintenance is to keep those funding levels high in those agencies. Similarly, most of the trails, the photos that you've been seeing, the rail trails come under a couple of programs that are associated with the transportation budget, and of course, or the transportation program, which of course was reauthorized in the last year under MAP 21. And in there, you've got the major transportation budget, which goes down, as you know, to the states and to local communities, which since the early 1990s, a major portion of the gasoline tax money has been used to develop the kind of, like, I'm from Madison, Wisconsin, and that trail picture from there, I use that trail commuting very frequently. Those kind of trails have been developed with the federal money, and I can tell you that from my experience in a state that values trails very much, the federal portion of the funding is absolutely critical as a way, as a catalyst to get local and community funding to make those things happen. So there's that program. There's also the recreational trails program under MAP 21, which is goes to more generally the whole spectrum of trails, motorized, non-motorized, both in rural areas and in urban areas all across the country. Those two programs, since I think the transportation reauthorization was only for 2 years, is that correct? You're going to be dealing with that again in the near future. And it's really critical that in the next reauthorization, those kind of programs are fully supported in a strong and major way. The other one I want to talk about, and this is in the National Park Service budget, there's the Rivers and Trails Conservation Assistance Program, which provides technical assistance from the National Park Service to communities to oftentimes do the planning, bring the groups together that you've talked about, the local citizens and with elected officials to actually, make the plans that could lead to the trails ultimately being built, oftentimes with transportation funds or sometimes funds that are coming out of the land managing agency's budget. So if you want to have a direct impact back home, the way you can do it in your work here is to be sure that these programs continue to be funded at good levels and sustainable levels so that these opportunities can occur back in your districts and your communities.
Great, Gary. Thank you so much. Were there other questions? I think one of the things it underscores is there's a diverse array of resources available to any congressional office, whether it's through American Hiking Society, Rails to Trails Conservancy, the Partnership for the National Trails System, an individual organization like in Laura's case, Appalachian Trail Conservancy, that is looking at along this trail. There are representatives of how many different trail organizations in here. Eric is from the Connecticut Forest and Park Association, which is related to one of the newest congressionally designated scenic trails, the New England Trail. If you wouldn't mind just standing up, Jennifer, why don't we start with you?
I'm Jennifer Tripp. I'm with the Pacific Crest Trail. It's a national scenic trail. It's administered by the Forest Service. We work with the BLM and the Park Service as well.
Yeah. And then
Oregon California Trail Association out of Missouri, and of course we go all the way to the coast, and the Park Service supports us. I'd like to make a statement. I've been a tourism person most of my adult life. It hires more jobs than any other industry in the United States. There's some congressional folks that look down on tourism and they think it's a joke. How do we get this economic information from your organizations into some of these offices and turn their thinking around?
mm-hmm.
Don't just keep it in your office or in your community. We need to get it around to these folks that think tourism is a joke.
Typically,
Could I speak to that for just a second, please? My name is Tom Tucker. I'm from Congressman Scenic Barr's office, and my boss is co-chair of the Congressional Travel and Tourism Caucus,
Good.
along with Mr. Bonner from Alabama. Right now, our membership is about 72 members of Congress, and we take this issue seriously, and we have been pushing this in the halls of Congress for many years now. It is a tough battle. Everybody knows their tax person and their defense person, but their tourism person is hard to find sometimes. So we have a group right now of about 70-some, trying to push for more, and we are a resource to get that information out to those members on important issues like this.
And Sheila, would you add on to it?
Exactly. An American Hiking Society is planning to meet with Tom
out how we can work together to better disseminate this kind of information. So it's being worked at.
Good.
And I think you'll see improved communications from private sector, nonprofit organizations like ours with federal agencies, and I think there's really developing a more robust kind of congressional caucus element, both travel and tourism, and then of course with the Congressional Trails Caucus.
I would also state though that I think it's great on the grassroots side to push for membership in caucuses like ours.
Yes,
You
thanks.
know, if it's important to you, it should be important to your member of Congress. And
Well,
part of your job is to make them aware of why it should be important to them.
I'm from Cheyenne, Wyoming,
Yep.
and I just heard a rumor that our governor has just made a statement that there will be no more trail issues happening in Wyoming because of the fact that all of the oil and energy activity in Wyoming is being confronted with trail issues. But see, if we can pull this information and go to we only have one rep, Cynthia Lummis, and I think she's on
Yes, she is.
the caucus.
And she's on the Congressional Trails Caucus
Yeah.
as well.
And then I was in the House of Representatives in Kansas up till 2004. They'd never had a tourism committee. We spent less money on tourism than the island of Guam. Okay, so we were 51st, and that's just a little concern of mine. And so, if you guys can help us and direct us to the people that we need to talk to, etc., and get this communication going, I think it would help us all.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Yeah, and I think one of the things that recognizing is there are a lot of assets. This information is vital, and it's very dispersed. And one of the things that I think is incumbent on all of us, and Tom, I want to underscore, it's Tom, right? Yeah, I want to underscore how important your comment is about we as advocates, as constituents, going back into our districts and saying, hey, this is important to us. Why aren't you serving? I mean, look at the numbers from our communities, our regional development, our county information, and yet tourism and trails and public land and outdoor recreation is a huge driver. And it's not just out west. Pennsylvania, it's not an accident that Pennsylvania is featured. I would say Pennsylvania arguably has more trail for the size of its state than any state in the Union. Trail available of all kinds, available to the public. And that's a very important, now I could see that may be a challenge here, but it's certainly one of the highest. And so it's a very exciting to see in a very populated and industrial state. So we've got about 1 minute and then we'll finish up.
I just wanted to say we do make a habit of it's sort of standard operating procedure that we deliver these reports to the representatives, the state and federal reps in the area where they take place. But we do, it's created as a tool for the management that they can take with them to see their reps, rather than our doing it. Right? You make a good point. And in terms of Pennsylvania, we've always considered that tourism in Pennsylvania was considered the third largest revenue producer. And even with those statistics staring at them, it was very, very hard to convince the legislatures to keep supporting it. They basically defunded economic development and TPAs and the like across the country. I think it became the status quo, the thing to do. So, so we struggle with it too.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're going to finish the formal part of this. We want to thank everyone for their interest, and Gary, Laura, thank you for additional input, and Tom, thanks for your insight. Want to underscore, Sheila, we still have some copy. We wanted to make sure we were a little stingy at the start because we wanted to make sure that any congressional staffers were able to get a copy of these because they had these FedEx from Colorado. We do have some copies, additional ones. I have a couple more here, and Sheila Franklin, who's the Director of Government Relations for American Hiking, who's over there, we have available. Make sure you get a copy, so I think we'll have one for everyone. Thank you for your attention, and we'll continue this discussion. Have a great day.